Good afternoon. My name is Joan Brzezinski, and I'm the Interim Director of the China Center. We're pleased this evening to have University President Eric Kaler and his wife Karen with us. President Kaler is the second alumnus to ever rise to the university's presidency, and we're very pleased to have him back on campus. Please welcome President Eric Kaler.
Thank you, Joan, and good afternoon to you all. Welcome to the 11th annual Bob and Kim Griffin Building U.S.-China Bridges Lecture. That's quite a name, but it's quite a lecture series, and it is really incredibly fortunate for us to be able to have Amy Chua here on our campus. We're honored. Amy, welcome to the University of Minnesota, God's country. Let me extend a very big thank you to Bob and to Kim for your generosity, for your contributions and commitment to the China Center. Thank you, too, to Dorsey and Whitney and to the Chinese Heritage Foundation for providing additional support for this year's lecture. As many of you know, the bridge between the University of Minnesota and the people of China has been standing strong for almost 100 years. We here at the U began exchanging students in 1914, and since then, over 10,000 Chinese students have become university alumni. This academic year, we have more than 2,500 students from China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan on our campuses, and we hold among the largest contingent of Chinese students and scholars on any North American campus. The public land-grant institution of the 21st century must have a global focus, and we have that focus. We have international education in all of our disciplines. We welcome international students, and we encourage the study abroad of our students as a fundamental element of their education at an excellent and accessible university. That we have such strong ties to China is a very clear expression of our commitment to internationalization. In June, I'm going on my first trip as president to China. It is not, by any means, my first trip to China, a country I admire and a country I look forward to visiting again. The goal is to reach out to our global partners and to elevate the University of Minnesota's brand around the world. The goal is to connect with our alumni, and the goal is to ensure that the bridge that has been standing for this past century, connecting the Chinese people, their scholars, scientists, and leaders to the University of Minnesota remains strong. I look forward to that journey, and I look forward to having you as a part of this great program today. Thank you all for coming.
Now I would like to introduce you to the generous benefactors who have funded tonight's lecture, Bob and Kim Griffin. Building a legacy for their children and for Minnesota, Bob and Kim have donated $500,000 to the China Center to create an endowment fund to establish the Bob and Kim Building U.S.-China Bridges Lecture. Bob is the president of Griffin International Companies, which he founded in 1997. Under Bob's leadership as president, Griffin International Companies has become one of the Twin Cities' leading import firms, focusing on custom products developed in the U.S. and sourced in Asia. Griffin International Companies connect the world's most innovative and exciting brands to the nation's most important retailers. Retailers I'm sure you all recognize. The Griffin's gift reflects their commitment to promoting mutual respect between the two cultures and their passion to connect people with China. Please join me in welcoming Bob to say a few words.
Thank you very much, Joan, and I appreciate that introduction very much. And I appreciate you and the entire China Center staff for all of the work and effort that you've put in for all of these lectures for the last 11 years. Tonight's lecture is a testament to the commitment our University of Minnesota China Center staff has to building bridges between the U.S. and China. And I want to thank Joan and her staff and everybody at the China Center. I also want to thank Meredith McQuaid for all of her work in the leadership on the global programs. Certainly want to thank President Kaler for coming down tonight and saying a few words. I also want to thank many of the distinguished guests. I had a chance to speak with Robert today. And of course, I want to thank all of you. Over the last 11 years, this program has grown and grown and grown, and I really appreciate everybody taking the time to come here this evening. I've been very fortunate to be traveling and doing business in China since 1988. I've spent maybe 150-some trips there, and I've enjoyed every minute of it. And I can't begin to tell you how much it's impacted my life, my family's life, my business, and my friends. And what my hope is to accomplish in this series is that what I discovered in my own life is really an understanding of China. What I realized over the last 20-plus years is China can't be put into a soundbite. It is way too complex. There's too much history, and there really are too many stories to tell. And over the last 20 years of doing business in China, I've also been fortunate to make many Chinese friends and be with their families, and to travel to many Chinese cities, not necessarily on a tourist map. And it's given me a real sense of the people, a real sense of the place, and a real sense of China that I didn't see on TV. Our speakers in this lecture series are meant to build bridges between the people of China and America and help them understand each other and respect each other. Our goal is to generate a mutual respect between the two people. I am so proud tonight to have our speaker with us. She brings a challenge to all of us of respect, respect for Chinese parenting. And I'm grateful she's here. So thank you to everybody, and I appreciate it.
Good afternoon. My name is Meredith McQuaid. I'm the Associate Vice President and Dean for the Global Programs and Strategy Alliance here at the University of Minnesota. And allow me to join President Kaler, Joan Brzezinski, and Bob and Kim Griffin in welcoming you here today. Before I do the great honor of introducing our speaker, I just want to point out there was a pink card on everyone's chair when you arrived. Please feel free to write questions that you would like Professor Chua to answer. We will collect them and pick a few of the most, perhaps, interesting and provocative questions to share with Professor Chua after the lecture. Amy Chua is John M. Duff Jr. Professor of Law at Yale Law School. She is the author of the bestseller, The Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother, a parenting memoir that chronicles her experiences raising her children the Chinese way. Amy was named one of the 2011 Time 100's most influential people and photographed with 2 live tigers. She is the author of 2 other extraordinary books. Her first book, World on Fire, How Exporting Free Market Democracy Breeds Ethnic Hatred and Global Instability, was a New York Times bestseller and Best Book of the Year by The Economist. Her second book, Day of Empire, How Hyperpowers Rise to Global Dominance and Why They Fall, examines history's handful of dominant world powers to reveal the reasons behind their success and the roots of their ultimate demise. Ms. Chua received both her A.B. and her J.D. from Harvard University, where she was executive editor of the Harvard Law Review. She clerked for the chief judge of the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals and has practiced law with the Wall Street firm of Cleary, Gottlieb, Steen, and Hamilton. Professor Chua has taught at Duke, Columbia, NYU, and Stanford. She joined the faculty of Yale Law School in 2001. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Professor Amy Chua.
Thanks so much, Meredith, and thank you all for coming this afternoon. It is a tremendous pleasure and honor for me to be part of the Bob and Kim Griffin Lecture Series for Building Bridges between the U.S. and China, and to be speaking in this spectacular setting here in the McNamara Center. Special thanks to Joan and Meredith, the China Center, Dorsey and Whitney, the Chinese Heritage Foundation, President Kaler, and of course, Bob and Kim Griffin for making it possible for me to be here today. So, to put it mildly, it's been an intense year. Things have happened to me, both good and bad, that I couldn't have imagined for a million years. On the not-so-good front, the very day my book came out, 13 months ago, almost to the date, the infamous Wall Street Journal excerpt had just appeared 2 days earlier, and I was suddenly receiving 500 emails every day, feeling completely shell-shocked. So the very day that my book came out, I was invited onto the Today Show. I appeared right after Snooki. But whereas Snooki was asked about her hot new Snooki's slipper line, the first question that the host, Meredith Vieira, asked me, okay, this is at 6 a.m. in front of 2 million people. First question she asked me is, so, yes or no, are you a monster? Now that's a conversation starter. 5 days and approximately 500,000 internet hits later, my family would be referred to as the most notorious household in the Western world. On the positive side, I have heard from thousands of people from all backgrounds, from all over the country, who wrote to say that reading my book made them laugh, cry, and understand their own families better. And this has made everything worth it and helped carry me through some of the rougher periods. Actually, now that Meredith mentions it, on the just plain surreal front, yes, I have had 2 live tigers in my house as part of a photo shoot for Time magazine. I was told beforehand that they were going to be 6 weeks and 8 weeks old, and they're going to be these cute little things, just like big fluffy cats. Well, there was apparently a terrible misunderstanding, because when they arrived, they were 6 months and 8 months old, and they were these humongous beasts that arrived roaring in cross chains with these 2 trainers wearing, like astronaut protective clothing, holding them back and feeding them live chickens. This is all true. For one shot, the photographer, who was very artistic, asked me to reach down and, for this shot, grab the tiger by, I guess you call it the scruff, and yank it up like a real tiger mom would. And I remember asking, kind of joking, I thought, now these things couldn't actually eat a human being, could they? And the answer was, I don't think so, we've just fed them, which is... Much of the intense reaction to my book has been based on a misunderstanding. As I'm sure you all know, sadly, the Wall Street Journal excerpted some portions from the very opening of my book under the headline, Why Chinese Mothers Are Superior. And I feel like a broken record. I must have said this 10,000 times now, but I always feel compelled to say it again. I did not choose or ever even see that headline. In fact, I saw it for the first time when I opened up the paper and was horrified. And more importantly, I just do not agree with it. I do not think that Chinese mothers are superior. I believe there are many ways of being a good parent. And in fact, if you guys are wondering, how did a Yale law professor, who usually writes about globalization and foreign policy, actually end up writing this book? Well, the answer is that I actually wrote this book in a moment of utter crisis, when my younger daughter, Lulu, rebelled at 13. So by way of quick background, I was raised myself by extremely strict, but also extremely loving Chinese immigrant parents who arrived in this country, the United States, in 1960 to be graduate students at MIT. They actually eloped to MIT, not the most romantic place to, but my parents were so poor when they first got here, they couldn't afford heat their first 2 winters in Boston and had to wear blankets around to keep warm. As parents, my mom and dad demanded total respect and were extremely tough with my 3 younger sisters and me. And the famous list that has been plaguing me for the last year, you have to have straight A's, only the violin or the piano, no play dates. That list, which I intended to be kind of satirical and tongue-in-cheek, that list was applied to me straight, with no humor, by my parents. So every day after school, My sisters and I would have to race home, and we'd drill math, Chinese, and piano. No sleepovers, no boyfriends. I remember when I was a senior in high school, I was invited to the senior prom. And I got up the courage to ask my father if I could go. And he, asked what it was, and then he said, no, you can't go. So, I pleaded, and then my mother eventually intervened on my behalf. And she said to my dad, look, she's going off to college, let her go. So finally, my father capitulates and agrees on one condition, that I be back home by 9 p.m. Of course, which is when everybody else is heading out. So I went to the prom, I got back at 9 p.m., and then I snuck back out a window. But despite all my complaints, when I was little, my sisters and I were like, why can't we be normal? Why do we have these crazy strict rules? But despite my complaints as a kid, today I adore my parents. I think this says a lot. We actually voluntarily vacation with them every chance we get. My kids love them. And I feel that I owe them everything. I feel like I'm in a good place, like my life, and I really, literally feel that I owe my parents everything. In fact, if I look back on it now, I would say that, despite my complaints when I was young, I would say that my parents, having had high expectations for me, coupled with love. I mean, obviously, if there's no love, there's nothing. But for me, my parents, having had high expectations for me, is the greatest gift that anyone has ever given me. And that's why, even though my husband's not Chinese, I wanted to try to raise my own two daughters, Sophia and Lulu, the same way that my parents raised me. Now, with my first daughter, Sophia, things went very smoothly. She was an easy kid. She was self-motivated. I never had to raise my voice or force her to do anything. Now, she's actually very strong-willed, and there is a line in the book, it's in the last chapter, that she forced me to put in. It's repeated, and it says, because she said to me, not long before the book came out, she said, Mommy, people reading this book are going to assume that your strict parenting was imposed on me, when in fact, I chose to go along with it by my own will. And that's true. She's a really strong kid, but nevertheless, she was incredibly easy, and I got cocky. I thought, what is wrong with all these Western parents? You just have to be a little firm, and everyone can go to Carnegie Hall. But then, and I was talking to some parents before this, this is very universal. I sort of feel that fate has a way of evening things out. My second daughter came along, Lulu, and she is a real fireball. There must be moms out there, so I think part of the problem is that she and I have very similar personalities. We're very similar, we have the same kind of temper, but basically, I got my comeuppance. Lulu and I essentially locked horns from day one. Actually, it was before day one. This is so bizarre, even when I was pregnant with her, she kicked until I was literally black or blue. But I feel like that kid was born saying no. And the book, which by the way, is supposed to be funny, I've been going around the country trying to explain that for the last year, but the book, which is supposed to be funny, is filled with these zany showdowns between my two daughters and me, in which they always win. And it is so bizarre to read about myself in the media. I mean, it's almost unrecognizable. So there's one out there, you can Google it, that says, lots, but that says, Amy Chua cruelly put her 3-year-old daughter out in the freezing cold. Well, if you read that scene, it's actually in chapter 2, it's on page 3, you don't have to read very far. But if you read that scene, here's how it really went. So Lulu was about 3. It was freezing cold day in New Haven, and I decided that I was going to introduce her to the piano. And she was so cute. I remember putting these big pillows on the piano and putting Lulu down, and I asked her to, play, one note like this evenly. Well, very Lulu, instead of doing that, she decided that she wanted to smash at the piano with 2 open fists. So she did this for a while, and when I told her to stop, she started kicking and screaming and pulling hair. 15 minutes later, when she was still kicking and screaming, I dragged her over to the door, and I said, Lulu, if you don't stop kicking and screaming, you cannot stay in this house. So what does my 3-year-old do? I mean, she's wearing like a sweater and a skirt with tights, no coat. Lulu steps outside and faces me defiant. I ended up having to bribe her to come back in with hot chocolate and brownies. I realized at that moment that Lulu would rather freeze to death than listen to me. And it's basically been that way ever since. I mean, there is nothing I can threaten her with. She always calls my bluff. Another one of my favorite parts is actually another music scene. And I think some of the moms out here will get this, but this time it's in the middle of a violin practice session. I know she must have been like 7 or something. And suddenly Lulu bursts out, "Stop it, Mommy, just stop it." And I responded, "Lulu, I didn't say anything. I didn't say one word." And Lulu says, "Your brain is annoying me." I know what you're thinking. And you know what? She was right. I was thinking that her right elbow was too high, her dynamics were all wrong, and she had to shape her phrases better. So the first 2/3 of the book is comic. Much of it is self-parody. It's honestly hard for me, I guess, as the person who wrote the book, to understand how anybody who has read the book can't tell that it's supposed to be comic. I mean, there are these scenes in there with my when I'm trying to apply strict parenting to my 2 big, fluffy Samoyeds who can't do anything. But the last third of the book is very different. The book swerves because my life swerved. When Lulu turned 13, she rebelled. Now, I'd said that we'd always argued, but actually Lulu and I have always been incredibly close. And before she was 13, we'd have these arguments, but in the end, we'd always make up and end up snuggling in bed, laughing at each other. Well, when she was 13, something totally different happened. And I think this is just universal. This is adolescence and growing up and separation. But Lulu became very angry and alienated, and she seemed, and just rude, and seemed to turn against everything I'd ever stood for. Around the same time, my younger sister Katrine, with whom I'm very close, got leukemia and had to have a bone marrow transplant. She had a 10-year-old and a 1-year-old at the time. This was the darkest stage of my life. It went on for over 2 years. And my sister wouldn't go into remission. My fights with Lulu got worse and worse, and I felt like my whole family was falling apart. And really for the first time, because I've always been an overconfident mom, I began questioning myself and thinking, oh my God, have I done everything wrong? And the culminating scene of the book, I'm not going to give it away for those of you who haven't read it, but it takes place in Red Square, Moscow. Totally true. And basically, Lulu and I have a terrible, humiliating public fight in which Lulu says the most painful things that anyone has ever said to me, including Meredith Vieira. And I report them straight in the book. You know, she says, I hate you. I hate this family. I hate the violin. You make me feel bad about myself. You're a terrible mother. You're selfish. Everything you say you do for me is actually for yourself. So I have taken a lot of heat over the last year, but I think that I am pretty tough on myself in the book. I mean, it's a defiantly self-incriminating book, actually. And, I put all those things in. But interestingly, after that moment, I actually changed in many ways cold turkey. And it was funny, it took that moment. Right after that, I suddenly saw things differently. I don't know why it took so long, but at that moment, it hit me, oh my God, I might lose my daughter. I might really lose her. And when it hit me like that, I didn't care about the violin or school or grades or anything. Nothing was more important than my daughter. So thus began a long process of change and conversation. I didn't change completely. I'm getting to that. But I pulled back and, I let Lulu drop the violin. which was very painful for me. She was a beautiful player, concert master, but she wanted to play tennis. And I knew starting tennis at 13, oh my God. I really loosened up socially. The girl has an iPod, Facebook, texting. She's had 4 sleepovers in the last 2 months, which, just for the record, I am not happy about. But I really don't have a choice. I mean, it's this constant negotiation, a work in progress. So, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother is the story of my own journey as a mother, sort of straddling 2 cultures. It was never intended to be a parenting guide or a sally into the mommy wars. And in fact, I actually started writing it the very day after that blow up in Red Square. The next morning I got up, I went to my computer in the hotel, and I actually am somebody that usually has writer's block. With my 2 previous books, I have a certain drill. I get up every morning at 5:30 and I stare at the blank screen for hours. And if I can crank out 2 sentences a day, I consider that good. But in this case, the words just poured out. I actually wrote the first 2/3 of this book in just 2 months. And it's virtually unedited, which might have been a bad idea, actually. But I showed every page, every line to both my daughters and my husband, and it was basically like family therapy, in a sense. So with all that said, though, the book, of course, does have a point of view. I do deserve a lot of the trouble that I've been in, because while I certainly have regrets, if I had to raise my girls all over again, I would basically do the same thing, with some adjustments. Now, I'm not saying it's for everyone. I am certainly not saying it's a better way. But for myself, I am a proud, strict Chinese mom. I've taken down a few notches. I'm very proud of the daughters I raised, and especially proud of my relationship with them. And I guess more generally, I do think that Western parenting, using that term very loosely. I mean, I know that there are 1,000 different ways that Westerners parent, even in this room, but using that term very loosely, the sort of mainstream prevailing form of Western parenting, I do think it has become too permissive and too indulgent. I believe that we in the West can ask just a little more of our kids, and they will not only respond to the challenge, but thrive. And what I want to do now is switch gears and talk about some of the strengths and weaknesses of Chinese, again, in quotes. Obviously, lots of Chinese people don't parent this way. But some of the strengths and weaknesses of Chinese and Western child rearing, using those terms loosely, and also say something about how this all relates to global power and the rise of China and so on. So I guess the first thing I should say is I didn't intend this book to have foreign policy implications. That was my previous 2 books, but no one read those. Nevertheless, having had a year to, stew about this, I do, realize now it's obviously there is a link between child rearing and the rise and fall of nations. Our kids today will be the future of America. And I have no doubt, for the last 13 months, I've been asking my family, we've been talking about this, how could this happen to me? It's just a memoir. How could there be this global firestorm in 30, And I have no doubt that part of the reason for the firestorm in the United States is that I think my book accidentally tapped into 2 of America's deepest anxieties: fear of parenting and fear of China. I feel like I just hit that perfect intersection. A friend of mine said to me, if this book had been called Battle Hymn of the Albanian Mother, nobody would have cared. It's something very specific about China. But here is the fascinating thing. China is anxious about parenting too. So I think some of you know this, but you might be amused to know that my book in China, exact same text, no changes in there, my book in mainland China is being marketed in the exact opposite way. And in fact, when I saw the Chinese edition of the book, I was horrified. Literally everything was going wrong last January. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I called my agent, I called my publisher, I called my husband, I said, I need to bring a lawsuit. I need to bring an injunction to stop this thing from being distributed. Because when they mailed me the Chinese, it's totally different. The Taiwan and Singapore, the complex language version is beautifully translated, and I like that. But the mainland China edition, when I got it, so you know that the English title is called Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother. Well, here's how they translated that title in the Chinese edition. It is called Parenting by a Yale Law Professor, How to Raise Kids in America. That's the title. Yeah. Okay. So I was horrified, and the cover of the book is a huge picture of me wrapped in a red, white, and blue flag. Or just like stars and stripes all around me. And so when I called, I have a lot of contacts. I called all judges and friends and lawyers and students all in China, and believe it or not, they all said to me, Amy, yeah, it's not ideal. It looks a little tacky, but they all said, it's not as bad a title as you think. And the reason for that is because China has the exact opposite problem as the United States. Now, I'm sure you've read lots of news articles, and you know how many of you, I'm sure, visited China. You know how fast Shanghai and Beijing have changed. There's Prada, there's Starbucks. But, some aspects of Chinese society change very, very slowly. And one of those things is the education system, which is still extremely authoritarian and examination based. So even in modern, exciting China, today, even very young kids basically study or drill or work every single day from 7 a.m. till 10 p.m. Grades are publicly posted from 1 to the bottom. The self-esteem movement has not reached China. And there's just no time for friends during the day, for relaxing, never even heard of the concept of a sleepover. There was one scandal recently where teachers chose the kids who had worse grades and made them wear different color ties to humiliate them. So while in the United States, I'm known in many circles as the meanest mom on the planet, I think it's very telling that the Chinese version of Mary Claire, which is a woman's magazine, they interviewed me and asked me to give their readers tips on how to be such good friends with your daughters. So really, it's like opposite ends of the spectrum. And let me now give you two very specific examples of areas where I think China and the United States have the diametrically opposite problems when it comes to education and child rearing. And the first thing I want to talk about is this question of choice and freedom. My own view is that Western parents today tend to give their children too much choice, especially when they're very young. They're terrified that if they say no, their kids won't like them or they'll feel bad. But I think that if you give a 6 or 7-year-old, the choice, pursue your passions today, I think that choice is going to be playing video games and eating candy all day. Young children aren't mature enough always to know what's best for them. So I remember once when Lulu came home from school, maybe she was about 7, with a really bad math test. And I remember she came home stomping and she said, "I'm bad at math. I hate math." And now some parents, their response, I happen to know this because this was my husband's response, and it was also Lulu's teacher's response. I think one way that a lot of parents would respond to that is to want to comfort the child and to say, don't worry, honey, you don't need to be good at math. Lots of people aren't good at math. You can be good at something else. Well, I went the opposite way. I said, what? No way. You've had one test, you're 7 years old, and some of you, this might be familiar, I hand wrote all these practice drill tests, like 17 of them, and every night after dinner, I drilled them with Lulu for an hour a night with a stopwatch. Not kidding. Now, I do want to say, though, it was just for 1 week, okay? And it was really not... no, it really was not Guantanamo Bay. It really wasn't. But a week later, she came back. The next test, she did really well. You know, guess what? She decided that she didn't hate math so much. And then she did well again, and some of her friends started calling her a math whiz. She was the girl that was good at math. Well, fast forward 9 years, today, math is Lulu's favorite subject. A lot of people have asked me, in a way, I think the person who got the worst rap in this whole thing is my husband. All these people are like, how could that man let this happen? Because he's really not, and I'll say more about it if you ask me, but one of the reasons that my husband, who was raised in exactly the opposite way as me, he was raised in the most liberal, sort of freewheeling family. They could do absolutely anything, just pursue whatever you want. They didn't even have to wear clothes, actually. But one of the reasons that my husband supported my strict parenting is that he is actually somebody who wishes he had been forced to do more things as a kid. He remembers being little and his mom asking him, do you want to learn an instrument or do you want to play with your friends? Play with my friends. So my husband, who for some reason feels that he's very musically inclined, doesn't read any notes. He doesn't play an instrument or read any notes. And he also has been trying since we were married to learn Mandarin, and wishes that somebody else had forced him, because it's just really hard, to start at age 30. That's one thing. My kids complain about so many things, but that's one thing they don't complain about. I forced my kids to learn Mandarin, starting from when they were babies, and suddenly now that they're in high school and college, it is all the rage. All of their friends at high school all have the language tapes, they're all studying Mandarin. And suddenly my girls, they discover they're fluent. They don't even remember how it happened. So that's one thing that they don't complain about. So that's kind of my view about choice in this country. But on the other hand, I really do think China has not only the opposite problem, but in some ways a worse problem. I think China, kids in China today have too little choice, too little freedom, too little space. There's no room to be original and to explore it all. I was actually in China last June, went with my whole family on this book tour. My daughter Sophia actually did all of her TV interviews in Mandarin, which I was impressed with. I thought that I was also able to do that until they told me that my accent was too bad. So I did mine in English. So the thing about the book in China is that I'm sort of depressed about this also. It's a huge bestseller there, but for all the wrong reasons. It's a terrible misunderstanding. No matter how many times I went on, how many shows I did explaining, there's satire, irony, supposed to be funny, whatever, they are definitely reading it like a how-to guide. It's like, okay, so only violin and piano. And I have explained over and over. So finally, I was giving this big talk in this, and again, I got one of these questions that just didn't seem to get it. And she got up and she said, can you suggest what is the most important thing that we here in China can do to help our kids get into an Ivy League school? So I thought about it and I said, honestly, and I can't believe I'm saying this given my reputation in the United States, but honestly, for you guys in this country, in China, I think the best thing that you could give your kids at this point is some sleepovers and some play dates. I actually said that. I think that there is just no, it's related, right, to this lack of initiative and creativity thing. The kids are much less vibrant there. And one of the things my lecture there was the exact opposite of talks that I give in the United States. So when I was explaining to them, I said, choice in school. I said, one great thing about schools in the United States is there's so many ways to be excellent. Even in high school. You can be excellent if you're on the football team, or if you're the star of the school play, or if you start the environmental club, or if you're student body president, or, a million ways. You do incredible public service. Whereas in China, it's pretty much, you got to be the top student. It's just such a pressure cooker. And same with extracurriculars. Again, a lot of people misunderstand my book. As I mentioned, the list is a little bit satirical. about choices, and I think that there are just, I was saying to the Chinese, I said, you know, if you, it's sort of funny, it's in China, but also Korea and a little bit India. It really is true that the violin, the piano, and maybe the cello, those are like the gold standard, those instruments, you know. So what I was saying is, you know, why not try the saxophone or the flute? I think that's part of the reason for so much competition and pressure in China, because everyone's going for these few things. And one of the things that I've noticed among Asian Americans, because at the law school, I'm actually, you know, it's funny given my national reputation, but at the law school, I'm known to be a very big mentor, particularly for my Asian students. And one of the very tragic things I've noticed is that among a lot of Asian American parents, especially immigrants, there is just, it's just too narrow a range of things that count as successful careers. You know, it's like 5 things. And I have had, you can't believe how many, I've had students come to me who are Harvard, Rhodes Scholar, they've won every single prize, they're at Yale Law School, and they come to me 3L year and they say, I'm miserable, I can't do this, I don't want to be a lawyer, I want to be a fashion designer. This actually happened, and it happened twice actually. And in one case it worked out okay, in the other case, the person ended up breaking with their family, which I think is the ultimate tragedy. I mean, the family just could not accept that as a career choice. So that's one thing. Another area where I think we have opposite problems is on the point of creativity. This has always been America's strength. It's really our lifeblood, and China knows this. And the Chinese are desperately trying to learn from us. Everyone in China knows that their education system is too rote. It's still based largely on just memorization, too stifling and too miserable. And they are trying to find ways to encourage more creativity and individuality and leadership in their children. Same with Korea. I just got back from there also. And I think it's actually much harder, by the way, to go in that direction. I was actually back in China in November. I was asked to write a cover story for Newsweek on China's new female self-made billionaires. And it's coming out the second week of March. So Newsweek sent me to China, and I interviewed 4 of these incredibly fascinating women. And I'm happy to tell you more about them during Q&A. But what I learned is that every single one of them, you know what they want to do with their children? Send them west. And it's not just them. Anybody who can afford it, all they want to do is to send their kids to school in the West. And it's not just to college, but to Western boarding high schools. Now, seeing these education shifts in China, some Americans are taking a self-congratulatory stance. You know, they're saying, see? Even the Chinese are abandoning their methods and trying to be more like us. USA, USA. I think such complacency is a terrible mistake. Obviously, we in the West should be trying to improve too. We should keep what we do well, and we do so much well here. University of Minnesota is a perfect example, right? We are so good at teaching our kids how to be independent, and irreverent and creative, and to think outside the box, to be civic and community-oriented. But we should also think candidly about what we're not doing so well in this country. And we do have some serious problems. The average American kid spends 70% more time watching television than attending school. In the recent PISA tests, I don't know, either I have like amazingly great timing or the worst timing in the world, but a week before my book came out last year, the results of those international PISA tests were plastered all over every major U.S. Newspaper, and what they said was that Shanghai kids had tested #1 in the world in math, reading, and science, with the United States, you know, supposed hyperpower, coming in and embarrassing 23rd in science and 34th in math, not just behind all the Asian countries, but behind most of the European ones as well. So, of course, we don't need to go to the extreme of China. I mean, they have way more problems. We don't want to be just like that. But is there nothing we can learn from China? And one of the things that I think the Asian nations do extremely well, one of the things that we might be able to learn a little from in this country, is I think they are really good at instilling a strong work ethic and self-discipline and the ability to concentrate in kids at a very young age. My daughter Sophia, when this whole thing broke out, she was a senior in high school, and everybody was commenting about her, and they were saying, oh my God, you know, that poor daughter, she must have been so stressed out with that mom. Well, she told me that she actually was much less stressed than most of her high school peers. And the reason for that, maybe it was from her piano training or whatever, but the reason for that was because she knew how to sit down and focus for 2 hours. She could sit down and finish the essay or study for the test and, you know, then go on Facebook and call her friends and still get to bed on time. As opposed to people who don't have those skills, you know, 3 in the morning, you need your mom to start writing your essay, taking Red Bull, staying up all night, panicking, stressing. So I think one way, just to toss that one, that we can begin to try to combine pieces, you know, the best of East and West, is by being, I mean, our kids can still have play dates and sleepovers, but just giving them a little more structure and discipline when they're very young and will still listen to us, followed by increasing self-direction and self-reliance and responsibility in their teenage years. One of the things people often miss is they confuse tiger parenting with helicopter parenting. They're actually the exact opposite of each other. I think that what I consider tiger parenting, at least, is really about very early child rearing. And for me, the foundation is that you assume strength rather than weakness in your children. You think they can do it. You want to teach them that they're capable of so much more than they think. And so whereas the helicopter parent is, even in high school, hovering over their kids, doing their kids' work for them, kind of sheltering them, take the easy classes, is kind of just the opposite. But I think maybe a little bit more strict parenting when kids are very young might eliminate the need for parenting later on. I just want to actually say one more thing on this creativity point. I want to sound one note of caution. So creativity has always been America's trademark. That's just what we're the best at. But what I'm worried about is that I think today in America, there is actually a dangerous tendency now to romanticize creativity in a way that may actually undermine it. I remember in this whole firestorm that I was in, I was always being pitted against people, and people would ask me, so, what do you want, Professor Chua? Do you want hard work and self-discipline or creativity in your kids? And I think that's a false choice. I think that's one of the tragedies of the mommy war, is that we can't have a textured, interesting conversation. We have to pick one or the other. You know, it's like, do you want happiness, or success? I think it's a false choice, hard work or creativity. Of course you want both. Before you could come up with string theory, you need to be able to multiply. Really well, actually. And take, for example, all the people out there, you can search the internet, who point to Steve Jobs and Mark Zuckerberg and conclude that the secret to innovation is dropping out of college. In fact, both men exemplify extraordinary hard work, drive, and resilience in the face of failure. What Jobs and Zuckerberg teach us all, what they teach me, and what I want to try to convey to our kids, I think, is that we should apply those qualities of hard work and drive and resilience to something we feel passionate about, something we love, something we choose. The fact remains that you cannot invent Google, Facebook, or the iPod unless you have mastered the basics, are willing to put in some long hours, and can pick yourself up off the floor when life knocks you down the first 10 times. Let me now let me just say something about happiness. I want to talk about this because I am sure that I think this is the single biggest misunderstanding out there about my views. I see it everywhere. So if I had a magic button and I could just choose in 1 second for my kids, either happiness or success, that is such a no-brainer. I would choose happiness in a second. It's just obvious that's what we want. I just happen to think that it's quite a complicated question, how to raise strong, happy kids. And going back to China, I can tell you this is maybe the biggest question that Chinese parents are worried about today. When you read about some of these, see the videos and hear about these Chinese parents, I think it's very understandable for Westerners from the outside to think, oh my God, these cruel people, they don't love their children. It is not the case. That is not the case. With their one-child policy, with families only able to have one child, these parents love their kids to pieces. I'm sure many of you have heard this term, little emperors. People are really worried now about, letting a billion spoiled brats bloom. It's very interesting. I did mention this in the Newsweek article. What's happened because of the one-child policy, in some ways, is an inversion of the traditional Chinese family structure. So the traditional Chinese family structure was a pyramid, and with, a few revered elders at the top, the grandparents, the great-grandparents. They were revered at the top, and they were cared for and revered and respected by many generations of younger family members. Well, today, it's actually inverted. It's an upside-down triangle with this one incredibly spoiled only child little emperor at the bottom, being doted on and pampered by often 6 adults, right? It's like 2 parents and then 2 more sets of grandparents, But one thing that so many Westerners miss when they hear that is that China's little emperors are coddled in a distinctly Chinese way. It is not the same as American spoiled kids. Why? Because even as they're people pick up their tissues and buy them everything. Well, these only children are also loaded up with the expectations of parents who have invested all their dreams and all their money in their only child. So these kids feel enormous pressure to excel academically. What we're calling spoiled kids, basically just drill and work night and day. And the parents are absolutely torn. Many of the people around my age and my generation in their 40s or so, they had miserable upbringings. Many of them lived through the Cultural Revolution. They were kids during the Cultural Revolution. This was certainly true of 2 of the women I interviewed. And also, those parents of that generation, the people who would be, 70 or 80 now, had brutally high expectations for their children, and that generation often didn't know how to express love. They didn't know how to express love. So one of the women that I interviewed, her name is Yu, and she's the woman who started Dongdong.com. That is China's equivalent of our Amazon. It's their online book. It's actually China's largest online retailer. And she, I'll just drop some of this so we can, for stuff to talk about during Q&A. She, like all of the other 3 women I interviewed, are what we call returned turtles. And these are people who are born in China, but then they go abroad to the West either for education or to work. Robin Li, who is the head of Baidu, China's Google, who I think is China's richest man, I think he's worth $9 billion, he was a returned turtle. And so was this woman, Yu, that I interviewed. She was here for 10 years. But when she was telling me about her childhood, she said she was so miserable. She said she was physically punished and wept if she didn't get 100 every time. And every time, and her parents were depressed. They were themselves persecuted during the Cultural Revolution, so they themselves were deeply unhappy. And every time Yu as a child did something wrong, her parents forced her to write a letter of self-criticism and post it on the wall. So there is all these parents in China who kind of grew up with that generation that didn't know how to show love. They want to be different. They want to be more friends with their kids. They want their kids to be happy. They keep talking about this, but they don't know what to do. And I don't know what the answer is, because they know that success in that country still in some ways comes down to that one examination. They are intensely aware of the fierce global competition. They know that even getting PhDs in China is not enough to guarantee jobs. And, you know, among the less wealthy who can't send their kids abroad, it's very sad. A lot of the women, they give up their own jobs. They lose their self-identity. All they're doing is training their kids for that one exam. So, and for the kids, the question is, are they missing their childhood? Are they having any fun at all? Now, on the other hand, again, I'm talking about opposites. Sadly, I do not think that we have the easy secret to happiness in this country either. Sadly, I do not think it's the case that if you tell your children, do whatever you want, pursue your passion, that will necessarily lead to happier adults. I'm not even sure, in fact, I'm quite sure it doesn't even lead to happier kids. As you all know, in the United States, we have very high rates of teenage anxiety, teenage depression, teenage alcohol and substance abuse. We have the highest rates of teenage pregnancy in the developed world. In general, these are problems of not too much structure, but too little. And they are not recipes for happiness either. Conversely, and I think this often, gets underplayed, I think there is something deeply fulfilling and happiness-producing in doing something extremely well. It can be anything. It can be cooking, photography, soccer, saxophone, whatever. But there's a sense of pride and joy in knowing that you pushed yourself to the next level, whatever your potential. So many people, again, think, oh my God, Tiger, you know, all she cares about is grades. And for me, it's not about that at all. And I guess my favorite story has to do with my youngest sister, Cindy, who has Down syndrome. And my mom, who was the real Tiger mom, my mom was just as much a Tiger with Cindy. I remember when Cindy was little, my mom spending hours and hours teaching her how to tie her own shoelaces. And teaching her how to pit cherries so she wouldn't choke, and actually drilling multiplication tables with her, and playing piano with her. Well, today, Cindy lives independently. She works at Walmart. She just got engaged to be married. We just threw a huge engagement party in Palo Alto. And her favorite thing is still to play piano for her friends. It just gives her, I mean, obviously not at a super fancy level, but it makes her feel good. And most importantly, she and my mother have a really great relationship. So in sum, Battle Hymn of the Tiger Mother is a much more complicated book than some of you may have heard. It's really about a lot of things. In some ways, it's very much fitting for this lecture today, because in some ways, it's my attempt to find a balance between what I see as the extremes of Chinese and Western parenting, trying to find ways to bridge those gaps and trying to combine the best of both. In fact, one thing that a lot of people miss about my book is that, you know, when you first read it, or especially if you only read the Wall Street Journal excerpt, you just feel like, oh my God, this woman is all about following strict rules. Well, actually, if you read the book carefully to the end, you realize that the book actually celebrates rebellion. The hero of the book is Lulu, my rebel daughter. At the very end of the book, in the very last chapter, I reveal that my own father, my idol, I idolize my father, he's super strict with us, I reveal that he was a rebel. He was the black sheep of his family. He hated his Chinese parents. He left Asia, turned his back, and never once looked back. And the entire book is actually written in a very defiant, nonconformist, rebellious tone. In fact, it's funny, my mother, who loved the book actually, said to me, you know, Amy, no Chinese person would ever write this book. So this brings me to my final point, and with this I'll close. Because of the whole Wall Street Journal excerpt, I think the entire book has been framed Chinese versus Western. But that wasn't my intention at all. And you always know that it's important when you're reading a book to kind of look at the ending, the last page. Well, if you look at my last page, it's a scene where, again, I'm sort of making fun of myself. I'm huffing and puffing. I'm turning blue. I'm arguing with my kids. And I say, what are the historical origins of the Playdate anyway? Do you think that our founding fathers had sleepovers? You know, how many sleepovers do you think, Abraham Lincoln had? And I said, I think, in the book I say, I think that our founding fathers had Chinese values. And then my daughter, Sophia, says, I hate to tell you this, Mommy, but if our founding fathers had them, then they're American values. And so to conclude, this is an incredibly diverse, wonderful, vibrant crowd. I want to ask each of you here, every one of you, to think back to your own, and it's going to differ because you're all from different backgrounds, to your own maybe parents or grandparents or maybe great-great-great-grandparents, whoever that first ancestor was, who first arrived in this country with practically nothing and pulled themselves out of poverty. For some of you, perhaps it was an immigrant from Scandinavia or Germany in the 1800s, or someone who arrived from Eastern Europe through Ellis Island to escape the pogroms in the old country, or someone who endured and pulled themselves out of the Great Depression. How do you think those people parented? I bet they didn't sugarcoat or tolerate much disrespect or see themselves as principally service providers for their children. I bet for them, parenting was about survival and building character, about teaching their kids to take advantage of every opportunity because they knew how hard opportunity is to come by. I bet they worked incredibly hard and expected their children to work hard and saw even the chance to strive for excellence as a gift. Like it or not, child rearing, as I said, is inextricably linked with our nation's future. We as parents are raising the next generation. At stake is not only our children's well-being, but the durability of the American dream. Perhaps it's time for us to reclaim those traditional American values, not Chinese, but American values of hard work, responsibility, rigor, and respect for excellence. Thank you. Excited to take questions.
Okay. Is it on? Okay. Is it on? Okay, good. Thank you very much. Excellent. All right, we have some very good questions. One in particular I'll ask while President Kaler is still here in the front row. What would you as a parent recommend that colleges or universities do to improve our admission processes?
Admission processes. Well, I'm actually a really big fan of this idea of, I mean, it's very controversial, but I'm actually a big fan of this emotional intelligence stuff. Partly because it's probably Lulu's only hope. No, I'm just kidding. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. No, she's a great student. But I do think, I don't know much about the University of Minnesota, and I know that they're always struggling and changing, but I really do think that standardized tests and grades only capture so much. I don't think that they capture nothing. I think capture a tremendous amount, but there is in some ways a way to, I don't know if the word is game, but I can see how a certain kind of perspective and a certain approach could actually end up in getting all these perfect numbers, and while that is something wonderful, you want that to be represented, I could see why you wouldn't want every single person to be like that. So I know these are not tips for improvement, but I kind of like the idea of there should be lots of different ways to excel. I look at my own Yale Law students, I see the same thing. I see some students who, they come to me and they were more like myself. I actually was not I didn't feel that I was a talented law student. you can get a lot done by working neurotically hard, but I didn't feel it was a good fit for me. I didn't care about, I didn't have, I felt like I didn't have natural views. And I have a lot of students who come to me and say, I'm getting not good grades here, and they end up often going with whatever skills, combining it with the law. Often they end up doing the most amazing things out there. Often it's not in a law firm, but it's whether it's in politics or starting their own startup or some NGO or some public interest thing, change the world. So I'm really into this kind of like lots of different ways,
Great. Thank you. You mentioned that if you could turn the clock back and raise your children over again, you would do it all over again with a few changes. And could you mention what some of those changes might be?
I would definitely, I regret not having paid more attention to the individual personalities of my kids earlier. And that's one of the things the book is about, too. The book is about a lot of things. In some ways, it's about irrepressible personalities and how, in some ways, there's so much that we cannot control as parents, much as we try. My two kids now, they're 19 and 16. I look back and, oh my, they are exactly the same people they were as when they were first born, same personalities. And I wish that I hadn't lost my temper so much, used such harsh words at times. Again, the book is pretty, it's a self-incriminating book. I include a lot of moments, sort of my own worst moments as a mom, those take-back moments we all have. And I feel like, there is one lesson I wish I knew when I was younger is something that my mom kept trying to tell me, which is you almost parent and teach as much by example as by what you're lecturing, So the other day I was barking at Lulu, do not talk to me like that. Don't use that, use that tone. And she snapped back at me, well, you do. And it's true, I see little things in my kids that are exactly what I do. So that's something. I guess that's.
Thank you. I suspect this may be from a law professor in the audience. Which is more fun and rewarding, teaching contracts or writing books?
Teaching contracts is. Well, it's going to sound like a cop-out answer, but they're just really fun and rewarding in different ways. Teaching contracts is just maximally fun in that I know the subject really well. It's not an area that I am invested in because I don't write scholarship in that area, so I don't have a stake. So I think I teach a really good class because unlike a lot of other professors, like if you're from the economics point of view, then you have something to defend. But I assign my kids, my students, feminist perspective, a critical race perspective, a law and economics perspective, a libertarian perspective, and we get these really good debates. And then it's really rewarding because, the students get a lot out of it. Writing books is, I wouldn't say it's fun. Like for me, working, it's like pulling teeth. But it's so much more rewarding at a different level because you produce something. You try to, my dad always says you have to try to, my dad always said to me, you have to do something that can change the world. And, so that's the part I like about writing books is, trying to get new ideas out, new conversations going.
Amy, you're a very successful law professor and mother of two lovely girls. I want to ask how you balance your work and family life. And this question is from a first-year law student with a 7-month daughter.
Oh, congratulations. Yeah, actually, you're the rear. That's very admirable. I think it's really, really hard. One of the things that's going to come out in my Newsweek cover story is that all these 4 women, they have very different views about lots of things, but one of the things that I learned that really shocked me is that they all felt, and they have lived here for 10 years, they've all spent a lot of time here, they all felt it was much easier to be a working mother in China than here. And one of the reasons for that is this traditional Chinese family structure where you have the parents or the grandparents taking care of your kids. So, it's sort of, you still feel like it's in the family, and also very, very inexpensive domestic help. So it's much more. I think in this country, honestly, when I would have some resentment sometimes in arguments with my husband, because he and I have the same job. We're both Yale law professors, but by my own choice, because he didn't care about the violin and the piano. But whereas he could, have a relaxed day, have lunch with people at 3 o'clock, part of being an academic is schmoozing in the hallways, being an institutional player. I had to organize everything right down to the second. At 3 o'clock, I would have to tell the big lie, which I always hated, which was like, excuse me, I have to go to a meeting, which then I would race and pick up my daughters, race them home, practice the violin and piano, and come back from my meeting, and then do it. And I would always have these meetings that were just, and so a lot of times I just felt like I was doing both jobs, very badly, kind of half and half. So I think it's actually a constant struggle. And I was very lucky because I had a job. I used to be on Wall Street. And I couldn't have done what I did if I had had that job. I mean, being a professor, I had a much more flexible schedule. I could, load up the work here and there. And so I think it's tough.
A couple more, some great questions. How do you teach your own children, social skills? One of the critiques of your parenting style in the book is the teaching, or I suppose lack of teaching, of social skills. And do you think that's true?
I think that social skills and emotional intelligence, as I mentioned, is extremely important. And I think that this is a truly serious problem for China and maybe other countries in Asia. You go there and you literally see that the kids there, they're not like our kids in this country. They can't have interesting conversations. They're not as vibrant. They're not as fun. I've sat through so many excruciating dinners with these, like a strict parent saying, Ying Ying has joined the journalism club and she was carried the torch for the Olympics and all this list of things, and it's just boring, So I think that what I wrote in an op-ed is I think that if you have an entire school system that is already so authoritarian and so oppressive, where it's all rote memorization, and then you do tiger parenting on top of that, I think you get no social skills. And I think that is a real problem. I truly, deeply believe that is not a problem in this country. This is a country where this education system is one, and our whole society, look at TV, is one that celebrates irreverence and humor and fun and thinking outside the box and popularity. It's just a completely different context, actually. And for my kids, they actually had another parent with a different view. It was all about questioning authority and, and fun. So for me, I'm not saying for everybody, but for me, in a society where, if you look at the TV shows, it's always the kids that are putting the parents in their place, snappy back talk. Social skills are, I think, huge in our school system already. I really disagree with, actually David Brooks is my friend, but I disagree that we need special classes and things, that what we need here is more sleepovers to instill more social skills. I think we tend to romanticize those institutions. And one more interesting thing is, this is the first generation of Americans that has ever worried about social skills, I think. If you think about previous generations, they didn't schedule all these, I need to schedule all these different play dates. It's just, we went outside and we played. And I think previous generations of Americans have been just as vibrant and creative without all these overscheduled play dates. So to answer that question, I think social skills is an extremely important skills. But from my own personal experience, I think, and I'm taking a little risk here, but I actually find that tiger cubs in this country, again, in China, different. But my students who are raised by tiger parents, I often find that they have unusually high social skills and emotional intelligence. There are a couple reasons for that. One, because they've had these crazy strict parents, they have to sneak around, they have to be actually very clever. You do. You get to know two cultures, what you can do. I've talked to so many people about this. I was like this myself. But secondly, I actually think that kids who are spoiled and entitled don't have good social skills. And one of the things about tiger cubs is that they tend to have a sense of humility. And I really think that kids who have a sense of respect for others, the ability to be grateful to people, the ability to be ashamed when you've done something wrong, I actually think that puts you in a better position to navigate the social shoals of college, which is, it's very difficult.
Perhaps we'll... Nice. And we'll end perhaps with this question. It's from a young Chinese person who notes that to this person, you stand among the greatest Asian women that he knows, or she knows.
Love Minnesota.
And the question is this. My mom called me a piece of garbage and worthless for the first time ever last summer after the publicity of your book. However, I've now read your book. I loved it. I agree and understand where you're coming from. However, if you could talk to my mom, what would you tell her?
Okay.
And his mother's email is on the back. If you could talk to the mother, how would you sum up the message of your book?
Well, to sum up the message, I want to address the garbage point, but to sum up the message, well, actually, let me talk about the garbage point first, because this has been, if there's one line that I wish I had not included, I've just been plaguing me everywhere I go, and I've thought about this. People have said, would you have rewritten the book? But then I thought, if I had sterilized the book, if I had taken out all, then it wouldn't have been an honest book. I mean, the thing about the book is, everything is in there, but this one, let me explain this for a lot of people who've heard about it but haven't read it. My father called me this word, it's a translation in Chinese, the equivalent of garbage, once and only once in my entire life. So this has been taken out of context, like Amy Chua thinks people should call their kids garbage when they don't play violin well. No, okay? He called me this once and only once, and I remember the exact date. I was 16, and I had what sadly is very common in America. I basically had a teenage hissy fit. And I remember saying to my mother, shut up, blah, 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 whatever. Again, I know that this is really quite common in the United States now. But in my family, traditional Chinese immigrant family, does not happen. And my father said to me, did not raise his voice. He came to me and he said, Amy, I don't care what kind of a great student you think you are and all the things that you think you've done, but if you cannot show your mother, who has sacrificed so much for you and done so much for you, if you cannot show her just the respect and decency that she deserves, then and then the translation is worth nothing, which is what and when I heard that message, I didn't feel like I was a piece of garbage and lose self-esteem. This is what I felt. I felt like it's kind of like the English phrase, shame on you. I felt like, I had done something wrong. He was right. I shouldn't talk to my mom like that. And I think that's a good message. And I used that word once and only once with my daughter, Sophia, also, in a very similar circumstance. Now, interestingly, whereas for my dad, now Sophia says she doesn't even remember it, the scene that's happened. But interestingly, I wish that, so to this guy's mom, I kind of wished, that is actually for me one of the moments that I wish I could take back. Like why use that word? It's not something that I even though there's cultural context and everything, it is one of my take-back moments. But that's like the full context of that story. And putting aside that whole garbage one, I think it goes back to the previous thing. I think it's almost like Western parents now are, well, the question of shame is very interesting that I'd like to write about. I think maybe there's too much of this in Chinese culture, so terrible things happen. But I wonder if we've, in the West, lost just a little bit of the sense that, again, sometimes if people do something that is shameful, they should feel ashamed. I mean, that's morality. I think that's morality. So, I think that's now on the message what is the message of my book? Well, it's not one simple message, right? It's a complicated book. What I think Tiger Parenting is about is, I think, probably what she thinks it's about. That it's, in the end, not about grades or achievement or gold medals, all those jokes aside. I really think it is about believing in your child more than anyone else, and teaching them that they are capable of so much more than they think. And that if they just don't give up and don't make excuses and hold themselves to a high standard, they can achieve anything they want in life. That's what I think the message is.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking Amy Chua.
Thank you.
We have a small gift for you. And once again, thank you to Bob and Kim Griffin, and we have a very small token.
Thank you so much.
Book signing back here. we're back on. The book signing is right in the room behind us, so thank you all very much for coming.